welcome back to my channel, and for part 2 of this vlog we are going to be looking at the sketchbook phase. Now in part 1 I would have just to give you a recap, this basically the entire series is to talk about how I do art challenges, especially month-long challenge, because I applied the same concept that I use with this in this video to do month-long challenges. The same concept applies. In part 1, to recap, what I did is that I introduced to you how I select surfaces and how I select the medium I'm going to use. Now in some instances, like I said in part 1, I select the medium first, then the surface. In other circumstances, I select the surface first, then the medium. For this particular challenge, I'll be working with watercolor, and I've selected watercolor paper, and I've also elected to use watercolor paints. I've also decided to use what type of watercolor paper I'm going to use, what type of surface I'm going to use. I've selected to use 100% cotton fluid 140-pound paperweight watercolor paper. So now let's go into part 2 of this vlog series. Okay, so now in part 2, I'm going to talk about the sketchbook I'm going to put together. I've selected the surface, watercolor paper, 140-pound paperweight, 100% cotton fluid. That's fluid 100, I think is the name of the paper that I've selected to choose. Now I'm going to be selecting the size. It's important for me to think about what size of sketchbook I want to put together. Now normally I consider a large sketchbook anywhere between 8 to 10 and 5 to 7 inches. A medium-sized sketchbook for me is 3 to 4 inches, 3 by 4 inches, and a smaller sketchbook is 2 by 3. For this particular challenge, I'm using a 5 inches by 7 inches sketchbook. To consider the size of the sketchbook, I usually think about what I want to do with that sketchbook, what information, what pictures I want to do in that sketchbook. Is the information I want to put in that sketchbook a lot of information? And when I say information, I'm actually talking about drawing. Is it a lot of drawing I'm going to put in that sketchbook? What type of drawing I'm going to put in that sketchbook? For Inktober's and Huevember challenges, I could actually determine the size of pictures I want to use. I could use very small pictures. But for this particular challenge, the reason I chose the 5 by 7 is because according to the Get to Know Your OC prompt challenge, it actually asks you to put your OC in different type of environments. And I really want the luxury of having some space to work with and not necessarily have to squeeze myself into a small working area. Okay, so now that I've selected the size of sketchbook that I want to use, it is important for me to now select the amount of pages I want that sketchbook to have, or the amount of sheets I want that sketchbook to have. Now with Inktober's and Huevember's and mermaids and unicorn challenges, the number of prompts will predetermine the number of pages my sketchbook will have. But also I ask myself a very important question: what am I willing to commit to? Now I have to look deep within myself and be honest with myself when I'm asking myself these questions. What do I want? How much pictures do I want to draw? How much pictures do I want to render? What am I able to commit to? I look at what I feel and I'm honest with myself what I want to commit to, and I put the amount of sheets in that sketchbook that I know that I can do. I don't want to overwhelm myself and say, okay, let me do a 31-day challenge. Let's do Inktober, all 31 days. And by the time I get to day 8, I'm exhausted. I don't want to feel like I'm overwhelmed myself, and then I have an entire sketchbook that is made to fit 31 prompts and I only drew 8. You get my point? So what I want to do when I think about these challenges is actually think about what I want to commit to. Thankfully for this prompt challenge that I'm using, Get to Know Your OC, I actually predetermined the amount of pages I want to put in my sketchbook, and I round that figure up to 24. So I prepared my sketchbook, a 5 by 7 sketchbook, and I put 24 pages in it. Not 24 sheets, mind you, 24 pages because I want to work with this size of sketchbook with this size of page. Also, I want to test out the fluid watercolor paper to see if I have that luxury of painting on both sides. Okay, so I have my fluid watercolor paper all pre-cut up and folded to 5x7. Now, I would have previous videos that I've already shown you of how I put this sketchbook, how I get to this process, where I actually cut and trim the paper. I'm sure you guys are the one be bored seeing me doing all that. And I've also pre-folded papers in the sense that I already have my line drawn down the middle at the 5-inch mark. And I have a little F. I'm sure you guys can see it somewhere there. There's a little F where I have front. That little F actually means front. It actually predetermines the front of the paper to tell me which side is the more textured side of this paper. So you can see the little F right there. That means front. So I put F to F. So it's back, front, front, back. And I've done that with all 6 pages, or all 6 leaflets, I should say. I fold them in half, I put them together, creating what we call in bookbinding signatures. So I basically created 3 signatures. What I'm going to be doing now is the next step of actually putting that sketchbook together, and I'm actually sewing the sketchbook together. So now we're going to go to top-down view, and I'm going to show you how I do that entire process. Okay, so after I had put my book into 3 signatures, I'm going to mark them. Now, if you're seeing these big heavy books here, I'm going to be using these big heavy books to kind of press these together and shoot to make sure it's all even. Sometimes I would use a clamp, to hold it together, just so it stays together and it doesn't move while I'm working with it. But sometimes it does move. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm going to press these together. And I'm going to measure this out. Got a pencil and a ruler, and I'm going to measure my sutures out. Okay, this is at 1 inch. 1 inch 9 is right here. 2 inch. 3 inch. 4. 5. 6. Okay, I'm going to stop at the 6-inch line. Okay. Okay, so after I'm finished doing that, once again, grabbed my papers, because you see they're all marked at their respective lines, and then I'm going to bore holes in them at the place where I marked. Now, this is just a tool I saw at one of my local hardware stores, and I thought it would be perfect because it's sturdy, and all I did was put a stopper on it so it doesn't cause any doesn't hurt me. I think they use this when they do drilling, but I kind of like it. And I'm gonna bore holes here at this mark here, at this mark. Now underneath here I have a cotton mat. Try as much as possible to bore my holes on the line, and try as much as possible not to let my mat perforate my desk. Okay, one is finished, and I'll go through the other one and see you on the other side. Okay, So now that we have already bored put holes, perforate the papers with holes. Bore is such a Creole word. Now that we have already perforated the paper, we're going to now sew them. Now I'm just using regular sewing thread. Literally, that's all I'm using, regular sewing thread. But I know that there are actually thread made specifically for bookbinding. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those. So I have to use what I have, which is just regular sewing thread. So that's what I'm using. And all I'm going to do is put my needle through the first hole, put it through the second hole. Now I know there's a lot of binding techniques out there, and there's no measurement or specific measurements for this. You just measure your binding how you feel comfortable, I believe. I know there's some people do, oh, you have to do 1/3 of the entire length of the way, then do half of that. You know, some people ascribe to that. I don't. I just do what I feel comfortable doing, and I just bind my book in accordance to how I feel comfortable. And then I also know the different type of stitches you can employ when you're doing book binding. But again, I just do a stitch that I feel comfortable with. I know there's kettle stitch and this type of stitch. I just do a stitch that I feel comfortable using. And I know there's ways to measure the amount of thread you'll use, but again, I just make broad estimation. There's really no science behind how I do bookbinding, even though I know a lot of people apply sciences to it. So this is all I'm going to be doing, is sewing my pages together, or sewing what I know as sutures together. Make it nice and tight, nice and snug, not too tight because I don't want my sutures to rip through the pages. And it's only 3 sutures, which is kind of nice too. I know there's bookbinders out there who make books with like 12 sutures or so. I just do what I feel comfortable with, basically. Going back and forth, making sure it's cohesive. Sometimes I would put a little bit of candle wax onto these so that the thread doesn't tangle and it goes through easily. But I don't feel like doing that at this stage. I just want to get it over with. Plus the wax leaves a lot of film on my watercolor paper, and then I have to be careful because then I really do want to make the most use out of the watercolor paper. So you just have to be careful. I almost ripped the paper just now trying to pull this thread snugly. Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, now I pull the other suture. Make sure it's all lined up. I make sure it's all lined up. I put the holes together and I see if I can see through them. If I can see through them perfectly clear, that means the holes are all lined up. If I can't, that means something is wrong. I unlock my clamps. And then I put the other suture with this one. But first I have to create my needle to be on the outside of my suture. And I know it's not on the outside. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my needle now back through the last hole so it can go on the outside. Oh gosh. I surely want to show you guys that process of how I put these 2 sutures together. And now, using from the outside of this one, I go in here. Okay, and then I go back through the hole. Try as much as possible to put it together. Oh, yeah. My needle keep finding itself in knots. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but I really don't want to create a knot. It looks like it just did create a knot. great. Just perfect. Yeah, it created a knot. I'm gonna see how I could work with this. I think I'm working with a small needle. Okay, so I'm gonna push now my needle through this top piece here. It's okay with the knot because my paper holes are really big and it's a small needle I'm working with. And I'm gonna bring it back down through this first hole here. Oh. And this is how I create how I put my sutures together. And now I'm gonna go into the next hole. Do the same thing, I'm gonna bring it through here. And I'm gonna carry it back through the original hole, which is here. Okay, so now I'm gonna finish this up and see you on the flip side. So now that we're finished with the book binding, let's go into the gluing process. Now I'm gonna be using my trusty silicone glue because that's all I have on me right now. I do have a bone folder and I have my papers pre-cut. I don't necessarily select the color scheme of my books, like predetermine what colors I'm gonna do. Sometimes I do, but most times I don't. So what I do, I just choose colors which I feel at that moment to use, and I feel to use purple and this peachy, orangey kind of color. Now this is going to take at least an overnight to dry, so after I finish my gluing process, I'm going to end the video here, and then tomorrow we're going to get into part 3, because then it goes into decorating the book and all that stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this down. A generous amount of glue onto the binding covers. I try to make it as even as possible, and for the parts that are unable to stay even, I'm just going to trim those off in the aftermath. Generous amount of glue. I have a piece of strip here that I got from when I did I'm going to put this on here. This should equal, okay. Oops, sorry. Gosh, got there, but that's okay. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this way. I'm gonna hold it together there with that. And then I'm gonna hold it together there with this. I just need a couple more clips, and I'm gonna be holding those together too. Let me go and get a couple more clips and be right back. Okay, more clips, just so I could hold the book together. I'm gonna be leaving this for overnight. 2 more clips here. One more clip. And there we go. Now while these dry, I have these bended. What I'm going to do tomorrow for part 3 is I'm going to put the book together, but for right now I want the glue to dry. So guys, join me next time on part 3 of this vlog series. Bye.